finalize a long-range plan scenario to take out to the broader community. Now, I say if we can, because it's possible that you might end up landing on a couple of different scenarios. It's very, very, very possible. And remember, with these scenarios, these are not in any way cast in stone. They're not meant to, the cake has been baked. What we're really doing with this information is, because this group now is probably of your community, the best informed kind of across the board on where different needs lie in the district, and you've had some discussions. So the idea is to take your initial thinking with regard to what makes sense based on what you have seen out to the community in the fall, and then get input from that. Then you can just say, hey, what the committee was talking about and thinking about makes a lot of sense to us. We think that that's a good way to go. Or they may give us some other information. They may say, no, you need to think about this over here. We have to really discuss this piece over here. So what we're trying to do is trying to learn from you, trying to leverage your thinking to go out and learn more with the broader community. And then the other thing we'd like to do is get a little bit more feedback from you regarding the potential elementary school consolidation. And we bring that up because, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, of the schemes that looked at the potential of replacing an elementary, all of those schemes seem to be based on the assumption that it was a replacement school. And we think that, where it was obvious, because of the size of the replacement school, it was 600 students, so that would suggest that you're looking at consolidation. And from the fact that students were not occupying the site when the school was going to be replaced. So they were going to use one of the schools as a swing school, build a bigger replacement school, and then consolidate, basically. So we want to talk a little bit more about that and drill into that a little more. So let's talk about the initial planning exercise results. And for those of you who are here, you will remember kind of going through this exercise where you put up post-its on this board that had identified costs associated with need, and then kind of came up with some grand totals with regard to a first pass. And those ranged from about $144 million first pass to around $275 million. So there was a pretty good range, although three of the tables were kind of ending up closer to that higher end. And so what we did is we took those different worksheets that you did and we kind of cleaned them up a bit, basically. So these are the numbers that you all plugged in, and you can sort of see this kind of comparison. I'll break this out into just a few observations that I think will be useful as we're looking at the different schemes that were put up. So the first thing we notice is that there are cheaters among you out there. But that's okay. Every group we work with, there are always cheaters involved. So that's okay. But we did want to make note of, some of the points that varied, so to speak, from the rules that had been set out. So there were a couple of groups who felt that it actually made more sense, assuming there might be a series of, bonds over time, to, in the initial phase of work, go ahead and take the state fine associated with the Clean Buildings Act. So this is the energy improvement of your existing schools to meet standards that the state has established, but to go ahead and take the fine instead of making those improvements. And so these two tables had discussed that. One of the groups in Table 1 had actually added funds for a gym at West Mercer, and that was actually not one of the needs that had been included in the original tally of dollars and potential projects. That's not to say that we're all ears. We're listening to what groups say, and that's, just kind of a zinger that was thrown out there. That we wanted to sort of make note of that. So that officially wasn't a project. Not to say that it couldn't be. One thing I would say about this, just anecdotally, and this would really apply to any project from the standpoint of long-range planning, is when you think about initiating a project, in this case, putting a gym on an existing site somewhere with an existing school, knowing that the intention at some point down the road, whether it be 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, or whatever, is to replace that school, because that's what was identified to do with West Mercer at some point. When you do that, now you added a new gymnasium, a relative new gymnasium. And so unless you tear that gymnasium down, which you wouldn't because it'd be throwing away a lot of money, the new school that you would then design as a replacement would have to sort of be designed with that existing location of that gym in mind. So it starts to put some parameters on a future design that don't necessarily cause a problem, but it could cause a problem. So that's just something to be thinking about with any project that you're undertaking. Here at 10.2 million, you'll see here this amount does not include the full amount of the mandatory work at the high school. Just kind of noting that. This also does not include, some of these tables didn't include the mandatory work and so forth. And this one, I note there was a desire to try to use CapTech money for this work. This was program-related work at Mercer Island. And I think just one note about that, you can see it's a relatively large amount of money potentially programmatically. This represents about 40%, 40 to 50% of the total amount. Of your CapTech dollars, that's multiple years of CapTech, I think. Wouldn't that be a fair statement?
It would be all of the CapTech.
All of the CapTech, yeah, over multiple years in order to achieve that. Again, not to say that you couldn't do that, but that's just something to think about what the implication of that might be. Okay, so kind of breaking out just some additional observations. 75% of the tables, so table 1, 2, and 4, included 2 major projects. Okay, so that's a pretty big deal, both from the standpoint of the total amount on the bond, obviously, but also has some implication on construction sequencing and so forth. You get things done faster, but you also have to sort of sequence the projects. And I'll be talking about the implication of that in just a few minutes. And then one group of those 3 actually included 2 elementary schools. So one group with 2 elementary schools replaced right out of the chute there, and 2 groups with an elementary, and then finishing up the work at the middle school right out of the chute. And then the 4th table here, their main project was a single project, which was replacing or finishing the replacement of the remaining buildings at the middle school. So that's what they call this. Okay, another observation is that 75% of the table, so these are the 3 groups again, who had included 2 projects, 2 major projects, all included Lake Ridge Elementary School as that first elementary school to be replaced. So that's a pretty consistent thing to note. And I mentioned this earlier relative to consolidation, but all of these groups also elected to replace that school at the larger size, which is the 600, rather than 450, which is the smaller size. And all of these replacement elementaries did not include the premium associated with logistics of having kids occupy the site while the school was being replaced. Okay, so the presumption is that the kids would be off that site. You would then be able to demo the existing building, Lake Ridge, kind of creates a blank slate, a nice blank slate for whatever design makes the most sense, and that's going to sit there for the next 75 or 80 years. Okay. Another takeaway, 75% of, again, the tables include Islander Middle School. So of course, the team with the single project did that. And then 2 of the 3 included middle school. And 75% included about 40% plus or minus of the total program related gym. So one group didn't include that. And then 3 of the other tables did, to the tune of about 40% of the total. So they're saying, hey, we understand there's a lot of program that could be addressed at the high school. We think, 40% of it, we can fit that into the amount in this first month. And then with regard to other allocations, one group included connecting the buildings at Island Park Elementary. So that's here. And 2 groups included the ADA parking lot work at Preston and the administration building. So you see that here, 2 for $6 million. So I'll go back to that. Are there any questions you might have just with regard to those high level observations? Yeah.
Just one question is tangent related to it is there construction costs that would be saved, you think, by working on the middle school and Lakeridge at the same time, given that they're kind of next to each other, but a brand new giant park between them?
Right.
Or are those seen as, from a construction perspective, 2 completely different sites and it wouldn't matter if they're working on it together?
That's a good question. My guess would be they would be considered 2 entirely different sites. And in fact, you're going to see in a few minutes to kind of underscore the separate siteness part of it. It's very likely that those 2 projects would have to be done sequentially instead of concurrently.
Traffic,
Yeah,
cement trucks.
Yeah, just person power managing it and a whole bunch of different factors playing into that. And I'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. But that's a good question. Yeah.
So on that same note, then, if you were to could you do the middle school and another elementary at the same time? Or does that create the same problems?
It's kind of the same problem, really. Yeah, doing 2 major projects. It's not to say that it couldn't be done if it involves the middle school and the elementary, but it really requires a pretty big staffing demand to try and pull that off.
That on the school district's part, or on the construction firm, or architects, or
probably mainly the school district part. I think primarily, yeah, it's a big demand by district to do that. Now, for a 2 major project scenario where you're doing 2 elementary schools, you would have to do those because in no instance could you have 2 sites being replaced at the same time. You just wouldn't have enough seats available in the district to do that.
Well, I was going to say that one of the, with the 2 elementary schools, it's when you redistrict, you're only having to do that for 1 month, right? So that, in terms of the trauma to the children and changes in their community, especially at a bit of young age, you're only doing that once. And you're changing the lives, but it's where they'll be housed, but their community is not going to change. I did want to ask, you did use air quotes when you said mandatory, and we're talking about, of course, the high school football team, right? And I think that, Ralph and I discussed that, where is that engineering report? And, to get community buy-in, I think that evidence would be required, especially when you're putting that over compliance with ADA, which is federal legislative mandate, and right.
Yeah, no, I think the district would agree with what you just said. I think that's really good feedback for everyone to hear, that having the data there to sort of help justify that kind of thing, like the structural analysis of it. And I am certain that if the district were looking at a bond scenario or say a couple of different alternatives that would include that, they would do that homework to really determine, yes, it needs to happen, or no, it doesn't really, before they would put that out there or propose. Yeah. They're not going to do anything that is not justified because they'll, community's too smart, basically.
I was part of the group that that did the 18 million for Westminster breaking the rules because kind of my thing. But so I just want to explain the thinking was, understanding that, it would have building implications in the future.
Yeah.
I know one of the major issues with West Mercer is they're sharing their gym and lunchroom. And so adding that would alleviate a lot of the pressures on that.
Yeah.
So obviously it would have to be well planned and placed and all that.
Yeah.
But it's also looking at, if West Mercer doesn't get a rebuild for another 10 to 12 years,
Right.
That was our thinking behind it, obviously having no idea how much that would cost or anything like that. So, but that's where that idea came from.
Yeah. No, I completely, that makes sense, I think. It's particularly if you knew that a follow-up phase, a follow-up bond might not happen for a long time, right? Then it really kind of ups the ante on fixing that problem of the cafeteria and gym piece. If, however, there's a fair likelihood, and I'll just throw a number out there. This is what I would think about, that if the school were going to, after you finish this bond measure, assuming you do one, and that's a big assumption still, okay? So after you finish this phase one, if there were a follow-up phase that was going to replace this building in 8 or 10 years, I would think really hard about that. Because one is, building that structure on the site, if you could fit it on the site, have to be studied, of course, which the district would do in preliminary studies. It's going to kind of disrupt that site while it's under construction. But again, the really big thing, I think, is it has, in my view, potential very significant impact on how whoever you hire to do the design work of that building, what limitations they may have. And my thought would be, if you're going to do this building that's going to sit there for 80 years, the more you can do it right, with fewer limitations to begin with, the better. But yes, if it's going to be out there a ways, definitely something to think about.
One thing that, talking about elementary and consolidation, one thing that surprised me a little bit, I didn't know about this, I thought I was paying attention. I didn't realize that some education spaces in the old middle school could not be revamped. And I'd like to understand why that is. And if we do an island park, hibernation, in my mind, it's hibernation because, for sure change is destined. We might have enrollment come back up.
Yeah.
I don't want to inadvertently, hibernate it with the thought that it can't ever come back up. So I'd like to understand what has happened in middle school that's not allowing to go back.
I'm looking for that. I kind of know, but I think Tony probably.
And just a thought, I think there's some preliminary discussions about New City Hall. I don't know if we have the capacity to do all that, but if we're closing down an elementary school that still has some light on, there's some other purposes.
So are you asking about, you made a comment.
Decommissioned space, basically, I think is what.
Yeah, I don't believe that we are prohibited from OSPI to bringing that back online. We haven't affected any of the systems in that 100, 200 building. You can't build the addition to the middle school without taking down the 100, 200 building. But, as it relates to Island Park, the E occupancy is the most restrictive. It requires the most fire alarm coverage, the most sprinkler head coverage. So I don't think if you hibernated it, you would have trouble bringing it back online. You still have to keep it warm and you still have to keep it maintained and all of that, but I think you could bring it back.
I know there are some instances, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, where it's the new and lieu situation where if the state gives you money associated with a particular function and you use the money to build a replacement for that function, they're assuming that what you did is you said this building as it currently exists is so substandard, state of Washington, that we have to build this replacement. We're going to do new and lieu because it's so bad. And so what they think then is, well, if it's so bad, we've given you money to replace it. You can't use that for the educational purpose that you said it's too bad to use for. You might be able to use it for something else.
We're not in that situation.
You're not in that situation.
But, OSPI, their funding formula gives you way less square foot per student than anybody ever built. And they say that a school costs $286 a square foot to build. And so you take the less square footage, less, we're so far over what OSPI will fund within the school.
Right.
It's not a question.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I've also been thinking about, but to share, I was thinking, if we're looking at eventually having an empty building, would that be a good place to relocate somewhere that's not really working as far as accessibility and stuff? Would that be a good place to put the admin building and press? And should we connect Island Park and try to put a cafeteria in there so there's a cafeteria, a gym, and then that eventually becomes press and admin? It's huge. And then we do away with the 80, we probably do the 88 columns, but there's so much space there for press to do things. It's a lot to think about, but we've got these buildings, and that's a big building to do. We could do a lot of things.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a good question.
But I think just always thinking about how can we best utilize what we have.
Right. Yeah, and I think the thing to kind of remember with regard to utilization of the facilities that you might have sort of consolidated out of for other reasons, like the enrollment piece. Island Park is still an old building that has got a lot of other issues associated with it.
I guess it's the game of which is what.
Yeah, it is.
Does it lead them up into a little bit better building, and then it opens up that site?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it has moving both admin and Crest over there. Well, Crest would then separate it really from the high school part more than.
And maybe
even then, it's a. I would say the building is probably in worse condition than the existing facilities.
Okay, I was looking what's the.
Yeah, and that one I think it's just a good idea to think outside of the box, but Crest is very much a part of the high school. And I would say, I don't know what the numbers are, but at least it's come to the high school class.
I wasn't sure if it was a separate entity or if there was some transfer back and forth in the building. I was not clear on whether it was a separate, almost alternative school, or if there was flow.
In the prior discussion, the idea was actually to try to integrate Crest closer and into the middle school, especially when we started talking about CP classes.
To piggyback on that thought, I've talked to a number of friends in the community about what we're doing and different ideas. And one thing that kept coming up is a very similar thought is once we're done with using Island Park as the swing school during the construction, we move the admin building there, and you then free up space for the eventual high school expansion, replacement, whatever. That was a big issue back in 2012 when we were trying to solve the problem and not put a Northwood on this mega block, because we were anticipating at some point the high school is going to need rebuilt, and it would be good to have space to do that. So that idea maybe of eventually the admin, I had thought about the Crest connection with the high school team making it. Admin moving to say Island Park, then it gives you room on this mega block for high school.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And whether or not, ultimately if that move made sense, it doesn't necessarily have to be part of this bond measure. It could be and then follow up on measure right after this. Yeah.
So I love these ideas. Just want to feedback on them. I think they could be a good universal, we're not selling land, we're not selling any, that's always been a mistake when that's happened. We're not doing that. I think the other thing too is if we ever rent, I think renting a hibernated space is great. It's maximizing being responsible for fiscal revenue. We don't rent past 5 or 7 years. There becomes a certain ownership. And then if you ever need that property back, it's difficult because there's a sense of entitlement there. I've always heard administration buildings really challenged, and we always put our learning spaces above that. So that would make sense, moving that. And towards Toby, moving administration to Island Park, if it makes sense. And Toby, echo what Toby said, is our high school campus has always been, compared to East Side schools, a little bit smaller in footprint. So if it was ever possible to regain some of that,
right,
that would be cool. But you have to plan for the future, and maybe if the high school ever got to rebuild to bring the administration back and still have the potential for the elementary back in Island Park.
Right.
So I think we're all in agreement, maximizing our flexibility, but maximizing what we have.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you move out of that space, make it available, whatever makes the most sense for reusing it, you have that flexibility. If there is something that makes sense to go.
I have a quick question. I'm sure you've told us this already and I've just forgotten, but could you refresh my memory that with the expected decrease in enrollment, how much or what percentage of the students can be housed in the new building and how much would still require overflow into the local spaces? So essentially, at the middle school, right? So the number of students that are actually impacted by having that overflow on the school is 25%.
Oh, at the middle school.
At the middle school.
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but really all the students use the new building because it's shared common space. It has the library, the cafeteria, gyms, and so forth.
But there's classroom space.
There's science,
Right.
and mostly science classrooms. And
It used to be all 7th grade.
There's eight general purpose classrooms.
We have science, social studies, ELA, but mainly not math. Math has stayed out in the other areas, but we have a big school, but it's not one of the others.
so kind of everybody has a new building.
How many students?
Yeah. Almost everybody's in the old buildings too. Okay.
I think that 300 building is the one that's really interesting of all of that, with the smallest kind of third building, because, at what point do we not need that, or does that actually become a really important space when we're talking about rebuilding? So I think that 300 building, where it's fortuitous to have that.
But I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about when we see that real decrease in our population. How much will those older homes?
So how much of the 100
Right now, we're
200 we still need to use? Probably, we talked about this a little bit, but probably you could still use this 300, then it would only be 100 or 200, but it would not be 100. Once we get down to some of the lowest drop in.
And as a reminder, the middle school costing that we're showing is for 1,000 capacity. So that is trying to stay in alignment with what the enrollment projections seem to be saying, and not unnecessarily building 200 or 300 more seats that you're not going to use basically at this point. And the priority number 2, that ultimately that school and its design would ideally be designed so that you knew where you could do a logical addition if and when you ever do that to add capacity, right? So you don't pay for it up front. So I'm going to kind of push into this next piece, which is an extension of the plans that we've just been looking at. So what we're showing here, I think it will be useful as we're moving into these exercises. It's not to say that the smaller, I'll call them the smaller projects are not important. They are important. But in the big picture, if you saw this when you were doing your sort of different concepts that you were developing for a potential plan, that it's really the big projects that drive the big picture cost of the bond, right? So it's not the $0.6 million piece here. It's actually the $118 million building for just one of these. So I'm going to be sharing a whole bunch of overlapping information that there's hard copies of it back there that we'll be working with. So you don't have to remember all these things I'm going to show you. But I think it's useful to stay focused largely, not entirely, but largely on the big projects, because they're the big contributors to a potential bond, meaning how many and what, and let that sort of guide where you go with your discussion. So here you have it, tables 1 and 2. We're showing middle school and Lake Ridge Elementary. Table 4 had the 2 elementary. Table 3 had Islander as the primary project, driven by a desire to have a smaller bond amount. And we're throwing that back in the mix because you may remember I asked for sort of a straw poll hand raise. And the question was, if there were only one project that was going to be done in a smaller bond, how many would choose the middle school as the prioritize the middle school? Hands went up. It was about 30% or so of the group. And then I said, how many would prioritize in elementary? Hands went up. It was more like 60 or 70% of the group. So a lot more hands with the elementary. I asked that question because this table did a lot of good thinking about, hey, we think a smaller bond is the one that's going to get support. And so as they discussed it in their group, that's what they felt was important. And I'm not saying that that's not the way to go, but I wanted to just sort of get a sense of that from everyone else on these other tables who had not sort of been forced into that position. And that's why we're throwing an elementary out of the chute. Okay, so we're not trying to put words in your mouth here. We're just putting it back up on the table because of the hand raise, right? All right. You'll note down here the Islander middle school projects associated with the costs that we're giving to them, and they include the track and the field replacement. Remember, we talked about if you're going to do it, you're probably going to need that space for either temporary housing of students or construction laydown or both. And so you'll probably have to go back and repair that and need some work anyway. So that's in the cost. And as I mentioned before, the logistics premium was not in any of these elementary schools. So that's important to know. So in red here, what we did to try and sort of simplify this for discussion at this point in time is we took all of the line items that had been included by each group for the high school, whether it be programmatic or otherwise, and CREST, because it's a high school program, thinking of them as like it's a high school program. And then looked at the allocations that were kind of given by the groups. And so we just sort of said, okay, let's just make that at this point in time about 40%. Again, keeping focused primarily on the big projects though. And there was, as you recall, a number of mandatory projects as we build these out. So we said that for purposes of this discussion, mandatory, you're going to do them in the end when this gets refined way down. If it's decided in respect to the discussions that were had that it makes more sense to take the fines, then that can certainly be done. And it will take out, $1.5 million or whatever the amount is cumulatively. So again, keep focused on the big projects. I don't think that's my point here. And then Some other line items that we have already talked about, including the parking for those tables that included it. Okay. And you'll note down here that the theater seating, theater lighting and seating replacement, tennis court wall rebuild, and IMS connection are not included in bond one in any scenario. Okay, so that's none of that stuff is in here. But again, keep focused on the big projects. So there we go. And I'm going to come back to that again, but we're going to do this. This is a point where you can grab something to eat, come back to your table, and then while you're eating, I'll kind of roll that into some additional information using these tables. Okay. We're going to grab. All right, why don't we try and come back together?
Dance, theater, whatever.
And you can kind of still keep working your way through dinner. I'll start to tie in this other information for costs and that sort of thing. So here are 4 diagrams again of different scenarios and what we've added to this. If you haven't already noticed, you're going to see these sort of build up with layers of information as we go through these. But what we've added in this layer are the estimated dates of completion on the projects. And I should note that for any of these projects, the exact sequence, whether it's Islander or Lake Ridge first, could go either way, right? So those can be swapped as could these. So we just sort of picked one. But the implication of these dates really is that you can see these are not being completed at the same time. And so that is because of an assumption that doing the major projects sequentially would probably be a reasonable likelihood. Now, it's not to say that it absolutely has to be done that way, but as you will see, what the implication of this is we're taking approaches that involve 2 major projects and we're shifting out a little bit the assumed midpoint of construction and therefore the point of escalation. So the costs will go up a little bit with 2 projects, assuming they're done sequentially, right? And the idea is to try and be reasonably conservative, to leave that as an implementation possibility. It doesn't mean in the end that it has to be done that way, but you're hopefully covered from a budgetary standpoint. And to state the obvious, obviously with one project, you're wrapping that up as a single project here, and some of the smaller projects could potentially be done concurrently, but the midpoint of escalation is really where we originally assumed it'd be. And these are slightly kind of ghosted out because we don't want you to focus on future bonds, meaning bonds beyond this. But we did want to show you the potential implication of the phase ones with regard to what's left and how long it might take to finish up what's left over time. And we only want to bring this up because we want you to be thinking about, okay, yeah, I get it, they're farther out, and we're kind of telling you how far out some of them could potentially be relative to the existing condition of the school and the other needs that we've talked about today. So here you're getting the bulk of the work knocked out in the larger bond measures, obviously, leaving a potential single future bond to finish up, depending on what you did in the first bond, the other major projects. Whereas if you bite up a smaller chunk, which might be much more, say, acceptable from a community standpoint, community support standpoint, and that's been the discussion we'll be having you go through tonight, then you could either do a big bond later, or you could, in the same kind of thinking, do a series of smaller bonds that might be more strongly supported by the community. And of course, the more individual smaller bonds you do, the farther the work gets pushed out. And so in this case, if you followed that pattern through, then the last elementary would be out completed about 2040 roughly.
Are we as a group then get into the thinking about how to approach the community with scenario, let's say, but also with the future bond in mind? Maybe just the strategy about how we approach this in the bigger picture of the community. Are we really just kind of into that?
Well, I think what I would say is this is in your discussions this evening, we're going to go through 2 exercises. And if in the discussions you have, one of them is a group exercise and one is an individual exercise, that comes up. Let's say, a reason to do 2 now is, I'm making this up, that a reason to do 2 now is we believe that given what we've seen, the condition of the schools, meaning the sort of programmatic need, the physical condition of the schools, we can't imagine waiting until 2040 to knock them all off. And so therefore, in the big picture, that's this approach, and that leaves a smaller bite later on. And so that's the strategy, right? Same thing plays with the other direction, right? So yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Colin, you mean in terms of, okay, we kind of talked about a scenario, and then how do we go out to the community, and what does the strategic?
Yeah, at a high level.
Where did that answer?
I think it did. I think for me, it's just a question as a community member, and as a group, which do we as a group think is more palatable? Two bigger ones that are shorter in duration, or 3 longer ones that spread out. I'm just curious to hear what people think.
We were talking this morning, Brandon, Matt, myself, just once we get into the fall, because after we kind of wrap up here, whether we need one more evening or not, then we'll do a board presentation so that the whole board is up to speed at the end of August. And then we really we have to talk about what does the community learning need to look like. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're going to need all of us to really brainstorm and think about our different perspectives. So there's that element too. So I thought that's where you might be going, but just to kind of answer with that.
Yeah. And I see your hand up on the connector. And I did want to add one other thing to that too, is you may have noticed on the schedule, we've asked you guys to come back in the fall for 1 meeting prior to us, if we maintain kind of our current plan, going out to the community. And the reason for that is we're going to try and pull together the work that we've done, whether it be a sort of single consolidated thought, and this is the thing that makes the most sense to us, or well, there's actually 2 things and we're torn between them, right? We want to sort of pull that together and show you first, so that you have an opportunity to look at it and say, yes, that is an accurate summary of the thinking that we had talked about last spring. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to misrepresent the work that you've been kind of thinking about and talking about. We want to make sure that you're comfortable with what that presentation package looks like. It reflects what you said or been thinking, and then we'll take it out to the broader groups. You know that you're being represented fairly. I'll say it that way. Yes. Yeah.
I'm just, last meeting was the one that I missed, so I apologize. But in all of these, it looks like there's an overall assumption that you're looking at bond, but then also makeup. So all 4 groups determined Island Park is going in the HIB initiative, because there's not a scenario here where it stays. So that was kind of a big decision. I just wanted to make sure that I'm reading that correctly, and then everyone's on the same page.
At this point, that's what you were saying, and you're reading it correctly. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And that was very consistent across the groups. Now, I mean, you can discuss that again to verify that was consistent across the groups.
2 questions. One is on the future bond, I would put a paragraph in there just saying this is future planning is not binding anybody, because I think it potentially scares off people that were committed to this rail and binds the hands of future committees that were committed to that.
Right.
Straight to the top. I think on scenario A, was there a timeline? Was IMS goes before Lake Ridge?
It could be either way. No, yeah, it could be either way. We just sort of picked one because we didn't know. So yeah, and so these can be sort of swapped back and forth as could be really. But this in the last meeting, Lake Ridge had really boiled at the top as the first one to go. So that's a little bit clearer, I think, than this one is. So yeah. And we wanted to show you sort of the timelines of those dates roughly. So again, you can see this is very diagrammatic in nature, but there are a number of steps that need to be gone through. And there'll be a follow-up slide that shows it. But basically, this planning effort, there's some follow-up. If it turns out that the board believes that a bond should be put forth as a possibility to the community. And then there's some subsequent planning and more higher detail to really verify costs and just bring more information to the table, one of which could be that structural study that you were talking about for the bleachers. That has to be done. And then there has to be outreach and communication of information. And then theoretically, there's a bond. And again, we've just been talking about that as the date. There's nothing fixed to that date. We're just using it for discussion purposes. But ultimately, what it means is for the two project proposals, which you see here, middle school, elementary, or two elementaries, this is that sequential construction that I've been talking about. And you can see how it sort of shifts the midpoint of construction out. So when we went back and looked at our previous, the next slide may show it. Let me get through these two slides because they actually capture this point, I think. Because up until the work that you did, the project costs for all of the work had reflected an escalation to 2028, which was the estimated midpoint of construction. When three of the tables came back and said not one big project, but potentially two big projects, that's when we felt like we needed to go back and take a look at it. So bond scenarios that have been developed from the exercise results are more specific, which they were. And so we had to go back and reevaluate and make sure that the costs were in alignment with the number and size of the projects. So for scenarios A and B, those that included two projects, we adjusted that escalation at midpoint from 2028 to 2029. And C and D bond scenarios that have one project, so that's either just the middle school or the one that we added back in, just one elementary, they stay at 2028 because it's one project. So you see that here. Midpoint of construction, our numbers before had been like the first quarter of 2028 because we were back in the first quarter of this year when we're escalating from. So now we adjust that to this point for these two scenarios. And the single project scenarios stayed where they were to approximate midpoint of construction and escalation at that point. So we wanted to be really clear on and transparent about that shift because you'll see the impact of some of the numbers because it's escalated out one more year, have eked up a little bit higher. And so when you're looking at these things, you need to be aware of that and say, okay, hey, these guys bumped up our numbers a little bit from when we did our planning around the table. Are we still feeling warm and fuzzy about community supporting this? Or do we need to have another discussion about it? So we'll have exercises where you can kind of do that and think about that. Okay, so now what we've got is we have the dates showing the completion, the numbers, the correct escalated numbers. So scenario A, Islander Middle School, Lake Ridge big projects is at 279, two elementaries, 298, 144, and these are roughly the same as what you have seen because they're only escalated to 2028. And we've also added and this can be wordsmithed later, but we thought it would be useful to describe them sort of tagline, so to speak. You can choose a different tagline if you want, but this is really addressing all the levels. You're doing something in the middle school, you're getting going on the elementary schools, and then you're doing work, at the high school, Preston, the high school as well. This one we're calling really, it's focused on elementaries, right? Because there's no middle school included in that. This one we're calling Finish What We Started. So in the last effort, along with building Northwood, the middle school, you did part of the middle school. So that's, hey, we got to finish what we started. And then this one is like, we got to start with an elementary to be able to get that going. So you kind of just thinking about those as just kind of taglines, so to speak. So what does that mean? What do these scenarios and the totals mean for taxation? We talked about this last time, and we wanted to update this information for you and hopefully try and make it a little bit easier for you to do some of the math and thinking associated with the different proposals. And I will put a caveat on these again. These are, reasonable stabs at what the impact is going to be by the underwriters. Okay. But having said that, there are, like we mentioned last time, numerous ways that that debt can be amortized over time. You can change the length of the amortization. You can adjust step downs, which you'll see in a moment. So there are lots of different ways this can be structured. These numbers, I think, this is commonly the way it's presented to groups like this. I think it's truthful, but just know that there are different ways that it can be amortized that will adjust some of these numbers a little bit up or down, right? So here you see the 279. So that's the middle school and elementary, address all levels. You can see that estimated total rate, the estimated increase per $1,000 of assessed. And a good way to think about this, I think, or a bad way to think about it, depending on your approach, is for a $1 million home, so it's assessed at $1 million value, that's going to equate to roughly $49 a month. And we chose the $1 million because it makes it easier for you to do the math. Now, if someone's got a $3 million assessed value, you can see it's about 147 or something like that dollars a month for $3 million assessed value. So that you can use these tools to do the math. Here, focus on elementary, it's a little higher. You can see it bumps that up 3 cents per thousand of assessed, and that goes up $3 per month for $1 million of assessed. All right. And then just doing the middle school, you're at $36 a month for the $1 million of assessed. And just doing one of the elementaries, you're at $1 more, so $37 a month for $1 million assessed. So this I think is a very useful column as you're thinking about, based on the questions we're going to be asking in a bit. Well, what's my house assessed at? That means for me, it's going to be this much per month, right? So that, remember those numbers. Yeah.
So second or third time we requested, I think it would be really good if it's the median value of the house. Calculate it out. Let's do that. And we'll do that there.
We've got that, I think.
What's that?
I think it may have it.
Then the next one is,
Okay.
what's retiring? There in 2028, if we're looking at 50 or 49, what's retiring?
And does that increase above, including what's retiring, or is it like as in it'll be now?
Yeah, it's right there. So in this particular model of amortization, so here you see your current debt that's going to be sunsetting in 2028, 29, and eyeballing it roughly. We can actually get you the number. It doesn't have to be eyeballed, but you can see that's probably around 30 cents or so worth of against assessed right there. So that's when that falls off. And so, and remember too, when these are being modeled, you can see it's modeled as being flat in the future. It's never exactly flat. And you can see over time, you see like how this, for example, the cap tech, you see how it's varying over time. One below that, levy, it varies and so forth. So these are amortized with the goal of hopefully not seeing any jump relative to debt you've incurred. And what drives this are a whole lot of factors, one of which is just a shifting tax base, right? So that causes some of that shift.
So what would be nice would be, what is the delta between the light blue and the dark blue? So there's a little dip right now, right? But right before that, it looks like it's pretty comparable. The dark blue is a little bit higher. What is that delta? So that,
Right here, you mean, or where? Yeah. Not sure.
So right here, we're at 2023, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm punching.
No.
But like from here, people have been paying higher and then they're paying this.
Right.
And so now we're here. So compared to the average of these years, how much more is this?
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Is that the
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. So back in 2021, the total was, approximately $1.65 or something per thousand ish. We can get that exact number, but I'm kind of eyeballing it relative to this chart, And so here you can see, you're at $1.79. So maybe it's $1.68 to $1.79, something like that. So this is what this bond will do until, including after the sunset, because they've modeled it to incorporate the sunset. All right. That puts you back at slightly higher than you were per thousand in 2021. Right. But it's fallen off in the interim.
Right. So right now you're talking about from the nadir to what it will become.
Yeah.
It's $50 a month for a nadir.
That's right.
Yeah. So instead, the question is, what is that difference? Not counting the nadir photos. Or
Leroy, is that a result of the assessed value going up that the millage rate has gone down?
Yeah, that's probably the likely driver of that. Yeah.
That's not that the total people are paying has really gone down, but it's just the millage rate has gone down because the assessed values have
right. So
that's what people want to know.
That's the shifting tax base. Yeah. Right. And so that's probably one of the major factors. That's what I was trying to get at when I said it's your tax base variation, because as your tax increase goes up, the millage rate adjusts itself accordingly, right? So, or if somebody comes in and builds 3 houses, your tax base has gone up, the millage rate adjusts accordingly to that too. So there are different factors coming in. I think the best way, historically, what I found is when people are thinking about this is, okay, I know what I pay now, right? I know I paid my taxes this year. Just tell me how much more I'm going to have to pay to do this, right? And that's why we wanted to do it at this $1 million amount, because someone can go, okay, my house is $2.5 million. Okay, multiply that times 2.5, and it'll give you a feel for it. And we'll show you in a second, as best as we can tell, big asterisk there, and I'll explain why, where your community seems to fall with regard to a zone of assessed value. And that'll be helpful when you're answering some of the questions we're going to ask you. And so here you see we're only going to show this once because we just wanted you to remember this sort of second phase kind of thing. We don't need to focus on the next bond measure after this, but we wanted to remind you why there's this step down bill. And what it does is at some point in the future, that amount can vary. It could be out here, it could be closer back, but here you can see we picked it. And this is not totally random, I should say, because in the larger bond measures, I'm going to go back to this really quick. It's not completely random. When you look at when it's likely that you could actually have a follow-up bond here, you see that potential. This is like at the earliest point in time. That really depends on the length of projects to get out to that point, and then everything else that has to happen to get to that potential. And so it's a longer period of time than in a smaller bond, theoretically. All right. So that's when you get out to this point, then that starts to suggest when that step down might make sense to be thinking about. It's not cast in stone, but it gives you a clue. And this shows then how that sets you up for a potential follow-up if your community decided, yeah, let's follow this plan. This plan makes sense to us. Let's keep going. It provides that opportunity. All right. All right. So you won't see the second phase on these, only the first phase. So here is that jump a little bit higher, like we talked about. That's the $52 a month. We're just sort of showing a similar step down. For the smaller bonds, you can see this number of years is less because there is an opportunity for an earlier bond because you're only building that project and the timeline shifts a little bit. So we're showing, again, theoretically, a step down occurring a little bit earlier, right? You can do that. And so here they're showing that step down and then very similar. And you can just see the tiny amount of change there really between these two particular approaches. So let's talk a little bit. Question. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, I just wondered, these top tech and EPO are staying the same. Are those really going to stay the same?
Well, these are in the future, right? Yeah. So
that could. So it's not that it necessarily would be flat, but those could potentially raise.
Yeah, and again, theoretically, they should be influenced by your tax base and all these other factors. And if you look at them cumulatively, if you take each one of these things and you add them all up, well, you can sort of see how they trended over time.
This shows it's flat. It's not necessarily going to be up.
Right. And so, this, I don't know, I'm not an economist. My son might be, though. He's studying it. So I'm going to guess that this just really makes modeling of these much more straightforward. And I'm also going to guess that historically, when they've modeled them in this way, that it works out well. That in other words, they're painting a scenario that shouldn't, in most cases, get worse.
Okay.
Right? It's probably going to be getting better. So, and again, that's just purely based on what you see there. Okay, so we did want to dive into the question of, all right, and I think it's a really good question that was asked, is, all right, what is sort of the average? What are people's homes valued at here? So when we're asking our community to consider a measure of a certain size, let's say it's $50 a month, how much is kind of the zone of people going to be paying? So we went to this website, King County Assessor's website. I would encourage you all to go here and check this out as well. It's just up online. And it's I will say it's a little hard to know exactly where these assessed values, what year it really is. It's not totally transparent and easy to understand. The best we can gather is this information could be 2021, but I think I would encourage you to go and dive in and root around for yourself. This right here, which we've blown up, I think may be sort of the part of the answer to the question that was asked. Note down here, though, and again, this is coming from the King County website. We don't say how accurate or not this is, but that this includes kind of everything in a way. It includes residential property, commercial property, condos, and apartments. So it's the tax base. It's all of this tax base. And what this is saying is based on, we're thinking it's probably 2021 needs to be verified. The median appraised is about 2.1, and about 55% of all the properties are kind of in that range. Now, it's not to say there's obviously properties that are way out here too, for sure. But it appears as though the bulk of your properties, 55% or so, are between 1.3 and 2.5 assessed, as far as we can gather. So,
rentals, though, I mean, so apartments don't count. For example, people that are in apartments are not
they don't pay property tax, but the building owners do.
building owners.
Yeah.
So that won't
Yeah.
then be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Boy, if that were the case, I'd be buying apartment buildings like crazy. Assuming I had the money to do that. Yeah. So this, I think, is a useful, high-level kind of tool like, to be thinking about with one of the questions we're going to ask you, which is, a little sneak preview, is what do you think your community members are going to support? What are they likely to support? And this is 55-ish% of your community in here. They're going to be paying between, whatever, $60 or $70 a month and $150 a month. So you can do that math. All right, so here we go. This is the whole big picture. It's on the wall back there in hard copy form. So you have the taglines, you have the total amounts of what you had built out, you have the dates, including sort of showing you for information purposes what a given bond measure would have regarding impact and final completion. You have the projected tax rates here and the all-important amount per month for $1 million assessed value. So we're now going to transition into the exercises, I believe. Yes, we are. But any kind of questions about that? Again, you don't have to remember all that. It is up there. And I'll put this back up so you can look at it while we're kind of going through the exercise of these slides for the directions on this. So any questions about this before we move into our first exercise?
I'm sorry, I also missed the last meeting, but I think it might be helpful to know historically how people have voted on these bond measures, the kind of leverage and the climate has been, was that covered or not this one?
I don't know that it was covered, but any input on that and historically?
Ralph, do you want to?
1992, replacing, I think, 3 elementary schools that put them down.
So it was a big
1995, a more modest proposal got approved. That basically modernized and built new shelves around the elementary school. 2012 proposal that was like $200 million. That was actually about $100 million short in hindsight. Would have finished it all. Was to rebuild 3 elementary schools in IMS. That got voted down. And a follow-on 2 years later that built Northwood, half of the middle school, 10 classrooms here, at $100 million passed. So in hindsight, the 2 facility committee meetings of those groups and the boards were a little bit ahead of the community. But at the same time, I think that the need, the value was really put forward on the ones that. So
The one that found, the community felt there wasn't any visibility, which is a large number. And so that is, a lot of the community felt that they didn't really know what the funds were going to. So when we found more clearly defined approach.
So I worked on one that failed. 2012. I think it informs kind of the question earlier about the fall in the next year, the community outreach. My recollection is we did a lot of community outreach. We had multiple listening sessions. We met with PCN to do a lot. But in hindsight, it wasn't enough because a lot of citizens felt like it kind of came out of nowhere.
Right.
And the committee had worked for a year, 25 of us spent a year meeting once a month and doing all this work. So I think it does sort of suggest the issue of, okay, what are we going to do this fall and how are we going to help to share what we've done? Another point I was going to make, but anyway,
I just want to be clear, I did vote for it.
I also think we thought we had sort of the perfect solution, but it was large in terms of what the community was ready to accept.
I thought the horse got before the cart on that. The cart got behind instead of the horse. Because wasn't there like a contract to purchase the farm? And there had been no community discussion.
Well, that was a school district move, I think, that came in and kind of torpedoed the project. It's unrelated. I know what the other thing was that really I believe hindered us in 2012 is in the final analysis, our committee was split.
Yeah.
It wasn't unanimous, and we had some committee members who went out and actively opposed the bond for the reasons they believe were valid, and that really made it difficult to convince the community that we needed to support it when part of the committee had worked on it with opposed.
I feel like it was a PR kind of disaster, and like you said, but people all of a sudden were knocking on my mom's door saying, "Oh no, they're going to put in the Stevenson horse farm," and they're like, "What?
They're going to be tearing down our street because you're tearing down the
From our perspective, it also felt like kind of aspirational, which is fine. I mean, let's go big.
Yeah.
But I think there were some other options that that weren't necessarily presented.
Yeah.
That could have been more responsible in terms of spending.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it failed.
That was the at the end, that was the distinction in the committee.
Right.
That, those of us that thought the aspirational was the way to go and those that didn't, you're right. So even within our committee, not much less the community, there was that division.
And I think we've learned a lot of lessons since then from all of those experiences. I mean, that was coming out of the recession. People were more nervous, just never having gone through that before. And, we've learned a lot on how to communicate. And I keep going back to the athletic fields that we did last year, was really presenting the community with, here's this choice and here's how much it's going to cost. And then here's this choice and here's how much it's going to cost. And then really asking the community, what do you think is best? And I think that when people can see what are you getting, and then, if it's 26 cents more per thousand, to do this other thing, is that worth it to me? And so for me, at least in 2012, I'm sure I voted for it because that's what I do, but I had those same concerns. I had those same concerns that it just didn't feel, I'm like, I don't get what I'm voting on.
Right.
And so it's really like, we've learned so much that if we can come to, and also with, it's nightmares. What was the city group that did the?
Right, that's the thing, is that really vocal, like our street, because we were close to Island Park.
No. The city prop.
Say no.
Yeah, the just say no thing. Like if you come in, like we have to get to consensus, or that's what's gonna.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that there's a nice to have and a need to have, and I think some of the stuff up here is a need to have. And I think if you present it in that way, like such that there are certain things that we absolutely have to do, right? And there's other things that we might like to do, but we don't have to do those. I think the public just needs more transparency into what what's being discussed, what are the options, and if money was no object, let's do everything, obviously, right? But that's not the real world, and so we have to be responsible with the decisions. And I think as long as people have transparency into what those options are, and maybe there are a couple options, right? Like here's the go big scenario, and here's the hey, let's go value and let's be responsible and kick the can down the road for another 20 years of scenario, right?
Yeah, because this is an opportunity for the board and the district to learn from the community at a couple of different levels. One is this level. You guys are sort of have been empowered with the most information at a reasonably high level of detail. And then there's another level beyond that, which is anybody who can be touched, contacted in your broader community through whatever venues make sense. It could be online, it could be in person, both, all of that. And I did want to say too, just so you know, that this doesn't at the end of this piece right here, assuming the smart people in the room, board members and everyone else say, yeah, this makes sense. We think that it would be useful to go out and talk to the community in the fall about what this group has been discussing. Okay, so that happened. We're still back here. And after that effort, depending on what is heard from the community, the board could decide, yeah, actually, we've gotten a lot of good input, favorable input. We think this can be adjusted. There seems to be, I'm making this up right now, but there seems to be a lot of support. We should look into a potential bond. Well, now there's a whole zoning here where, depending on what is really being considered at that point, if it's just the middle school only, or if it actually turns out to be a couple projects, a lot more detail can be figured out, a lot higher level of understanding and confidence. And then even after that work has been done, then it's another period of time where that higher level of understanding can be shared with the community through a campaign and just information sharing. So from where we're at now to that point, there's 2 years of work and outreach and communication there that's been built in. And even then, this is still ahead of when, as you saw in the charts, ahead of when it sunsets, your sunset. So lots of time, lots of communication happening here. Okay. So let's look at what we're going to be asking you to think about. So the first exercise we're going to have you do, where are we at? I'm going to see how we're thinking. The first exercise we're going to have you do is an individual exercise. Just each one of you will do your own thing. And you have 2 cards on your table and a pen. A yellow card, you can take one yellow card and one white card and a pen. And we're going to have you individually respond to some prompts. And if your answers to each of these prompts are the same, we still want you to write that answer or response on both cards, even if it's the same thing. And then when you're finished with the cards, and I'm going to explain what they do with cards in a moment, we're going to have you take your cards, and there's a little big dot over here. Take 2 of these little big dots. We're going to have you tape them here, but there wasn't room. And you'll take your cards on those scenarios. So let's just kind of take a look at what we're going to ask you to do. Here's your white card. The white card is the first question. Which scenario, A, B, C, or D? This is the work we did actually 2.5 weeks ago now, I guess, 3 weeks ago. You've had a little time to think about it. You've had it refreshed in your mind now. You've seen what other tables have done. Which of these do you most support as an individual? So this is you now. You're your own taxpayer. You with the knowledge that you have over the last few weeks. And as you're thinking about it, that's the white card now. We'd like you to write which scenario you choose, A, B, C, or D. You can just write it up in this corner. It's going to look just like that. A, B, C, or D up in the corner. And the reason why you, as that taxpayer, that knowledgeable person, chose that scheme. Why do you think that's appropriate? And write it. Don't write a novel unless you have a couple reasons. Just keep it sort of simple and straightforward if you can. And the bigger you can write it and more clearly, the better. Because what we're going to do is we're going to have you pin this part up. So I would be pinning it up on B there, taping it up there. And then we'll just take a look at what we see with regard to who is gravitating toward which ones and why. And then the second card, this is where you have to put on your feeling the whole community karma thing. Knowing that about 55% of your community is sitting between 1.3 and 2.6 million or so in and assess value, which scenario do you think in broader country everybody else, the voters, would support? Because in the end, that's really the important thing. Because if you don't get support, then you don't have a plan that can be implemented. So that's a really hard thing. And so this allows you to vote as an individual yourself. Well, this is what I would do. And maybe it aligns with what you think everyone else would do. But maybe it doesn't. Okay. Yeah.
If you're, I do
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's okay. There's a lot.
I'm not if you are thinking about, full transparency and offer the choice, and you feel like, I think they would probably choose this or this, would you put a yellow part on it? In different scenarios, you can go.
That's an interesting question. You know what I'm going to say is if you really think that, if you fall in that category, I would go ahead and write the 2 letters in the corner on the yellow and just put it on the first letter. And we'll see that, okay, there are 2 letters on this card. And then we'll have an opportunity, if that's the case, you can explain why, or anybody else can explain why they feel that way. We'll have a time of discussion on this. So does that all make sense? You'll do your cards, you'll grab a tape dot, and you'll stick it up on the right-hand side of that piece of paper. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, when you do it, or you're on the I see it right here. Yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, they're all lined up with the ocean like this. They're all friends. Here's the safe dots are right there on top of the are you fighting for your original? It's like meandering here.
They're fine. Oh, thank you. You don't have to. You don't have to. No, you're supposed to be. Yeah. They have coffee and he's like pushing for us. Keep going.
Yeah.
I drive requires. So I do. Without saying we're probably.
Okay, so where are we at? I'm going to put people together here. So let's come back together if you've got cookies in hand. And I'm going to try and kind of hopefully move us towards, if possible, the second exercise, which is also very important. But, oh no, you're fine. You're absolutely fine right there. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to read through these really quickly. So you're going to hear a lot because I want everyone to hear the comments that have been said. I think it's just going to be very valuable. The other thing, in just looking at it globally, some interesting messages, right? All of you, almost all of you, have, with the white cards, have landed up in the larger zone, but almost all of you have put the majority of yellow cards in the lower zone. So there's sort of like we know a lot about it and we're supporters over here, but we're also realists over here, right? So there's that. So let me just kind of read through these. So D, I don't think our community will support a large bond without extensive education. So that's what it's talked about, and that's very true, I think. Voters support D. D will pass and we'll get one more elementary school updated, right? So that's kind of let's not bite off something too big. Let's get something that'll pass and we're going to make some headway on this. So here's the elementary. D, elementary school needs replacement. Price is lower than B. So get that going without elementary going without having to go on a big 2 projects to get the elementary included. Building one elementary school at a time has proven to be an acceptable strategy by the community. Community may have a hard time pouring more dollars into IMS. Okay, so that's a feeling about why you would do the elementary over the middle school. C and D. I can guess who did that. Over here. Really? Oh, wow. So right. Wow, you've got a friend here too. Then I feel that the community would support either of these options since they address issues at 2 levels and is a smaller amount of money to swallow. So here, both of those smaller amount of money could go either way with the supported. Past performance suggests future performance. Big bonds fail. I believe it will be hard for people to say no to something that has already been started. So here we're about to finish what we started in middle school. Middle school project will be completed before being asked to do another project. So that's the reason why you do the middle school. Price is easier for community support. With uncertainties about the economy and enrollment being down, I'm not sure that the community will support a large levy. We already have more elementary schools than we need. I've come to believe that thrift is what defines much of our community. What can we do as economically as possible? That is valued more than being the best or most innovative. So being cost conscious or thrift is valued more than being the best or most innovative. The community wants to see what they invested is finished. Everyone goes through the middle school. Everyone can see the need. The elementary isn't discussed as that need, and visible need isn't projected. They will want to go cheaper with C. Okay, yeah, that's the least expensive. Fiscally conservative community, already new completion of IMS was impacted by the improvements. Because I think the 144.5 million has a chance of passing. It equates to $1,000 amount increased taxes, more or less 1,000 per. I read that, and it will benefit all students. So that benefits everybody. Because a $144.5 million bond is not an overwhelming number and equates to around $1,000 annual increase to the average homeowner. It will also benefit, so that's what they were saying too. It will also benefit all kids who go to the middle school and not just in elementary. The elementary seem to be the largest issue. So that's the support of this. They're saying the community would support that. Largest number of students impacted, seismic risk to students, enrollment, allows swing school in lowest disruption to the children, allows rebuild of Island Park for another purpose, and maintains property in case of enrollment increase goes up after 2030. Support scenario B. B allows elementary schools to be a great place. Not a big difference in dollars from A to B. Rebuilding the elementary schools is the highest priority for safety and learning. I'm willing to pay higher taxes to build a flexible elementary school with state-of-the-art facilities that will retain quality teaching staff. Elementary schools are 60 years old. They need to be replaced. Money invested impacts the largest number of students versus the middle school. IMS being right-sized as enrollment goes down. Boy, that looks like an architect right there. The reason I picked B is because I think more equitable to replace both elementaries, cleaner to present to public, a venti latte difference per month from Plan A. I think if the right education and PR and marketing community will support replacing 70-year-old elementary school. So that's the communication thing right there. You do it correctly. This one's got a lot of white on it. I feel that this addresses issues at all school levels. We need to address at least one elementary now. Let us finish the middle school project that was started in 2015. Targets 2 age levels and thus many students. Scenario A completes the IMS project and begins the process of updating the elementary schools. Do Lake Ridge first, then IMS. I need to finish the middle school and do something at the elementary, given age, condition, and buildings. Reasonable cost that impacts all students on Mercer Island. Takes a large chunk out of the overall need and finishes the middle school. All facilities are overdue for upgrade and would rather bang it all out at once. Each level will have improvements. Middle school will be finished. Elementary will move to 3 buildings. Finish what we started. Start rebuild and consolidation of elementaries with potential bond for second elementary at a later date. Personally, I'm a bite the bullet and get it done kind of person. Important that Lake Ridge goes before IMS. Improve schools at all 3 levels, addresses elementary needs, best option overall, best value. With sufficient education and communication, our community will understand the need to finish middle school and rebuild and enlarge an elementary. Harder will be closing one school, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Need to finish the middle school. If we start with an elementary school, students will go through 2 big projects. Interesting, good point. Affordable, most of us can easily afford their daily latte. That's always a comparison across every district. That's happened here twice. I picked A because it completes the middle school, which is a need. The whole setup is awkward, I think. And it gets the ball rolling on the elementary level, which has been put off for years. A or C. The community will want full transparency and input and will vote on most persuasively presented option. And I think we need to move ahead in finishing the middle school and begin replacing 70-year-old elementary schools. We have fallen behind neighboring districts in the quality of our facilities. So lots of good reasons there. And again, a lot of white cards, a lot of yellow cards. So let's go ahead and have 10, 12, 15 minutes of any questions, observations, thoughts, maybe 10 minutes worth.
And I'm just going to hand these out. This came from 2 meetings ago, and it kind of played into some slides earlier, but there was a request to see what do taxes look like across the district. So Matt put this together for 2014 to 2023 of where do your taxes go. And you can see how it's changed since the McCleary decision with regard to local collections versus state collections on education. So there wasn't a good time in the last meeting to get it in. So I'll just put these on your table and then you can.
So we're not, just as a reminder again, we're not trying to completely nail this down with regard to specific, projects, particularly with regard to the smaller projects per se. But we're really trying to get a sense of, obviously big approaches, smaller approaches, within each, what's the priority, what's most important based on what you've heard. And the yellow cards weigh a lot.
I think that, sorry.
I just question everybody. I think this came up a little bit in the past. This one for the scenario A, IMS Lake Ridge, very South End specific. We're asking all Islanders to vote for it. Is that, what do people think about that?
I almost think that would be better than scenario B because you have all kids going through IMS. So I don't know if the community would look at IMS and think of it as South End so much as think of it as the age group that you're getting to. So I think people would look at scenario A and look at addressing the most community support, whereas obviously C and D are just, D would be the least and B would just be the littlest kids. And I think scenario A would look at, addressing the most kids in the district. Maybe people would be upset if they live right next door and they're going to have 7 years of construction traffic or something like that. But
this is right after Northwood, right?
Well,
North End project, right? So it's not just South End. North End's already happened, so it feels like it's down.
Just sort of in my mind, living on the North End, and I wouldn't think about that as much as I think the issue you said we're going to talk if we have time. Closing Island Park. To me, that would be a bigger issue for a chunk of the community than, they're only doing stuff at the South End, because while they're only doing the South End, all the kids are going to benefit from Island Middle School.
Yeah.
I also think that
I'll get to that.
So I'm at Island Park and I'm on the PTA and I have a big mom crew and we've been talking about this and I got to say, I'm really surprised at the reactions I've gotten, even when I say, I think Island Park might close and Lake Ridge. I'm like, oh, makes sense. One on the north end, one on the south end. That's literally this one every single time. Oh, makes sense. One on the north end, one on the south end. And also, it's sad, but can we really afford 4 schools? So I think that at least amongst my friend group, and we're right there in the average that he showed, we understand. We all have budgets and we understand what it is to have a budget and stick within your budget. And going from 4 schools to 3 schools, it's sad, but it's a lot sadder to have not enough money because we're keeping one going when we could consolidate and use that money more wisely. So I think that we've got some really pragmatic Islanders. And I've like 30 people, only one mom was like really sad. And everyone else was like, this makes sense. So I think that, I want us to take into consideration the really sad part of it, but also realize we all see what's going on around us. And we've got a lot of community members that are ready to do something. They don't want to wait until it's too late. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I was just going to make an observation. There's a lot of people that will look at this and say, well, my kid doesn't go to Lake Ridge, so I don't really want Lake Ridge to go, or my kid doesn't go to Island Park or whatever. But what's the majority of people on the island, I think, they don't have kids in the school district, right?
Yeah.
Of the homeowners, isn't that what the stat was? Of the voters. So I think that's the other thing here. Like whatever is decided, it has to make sense for the people that don't have kids in those programs, so that they can say, well, that's a rational decision. And maybe it is, well, one elementary school, one middle school, because it hits everybody, or the elementary school is, going to fall apart. So we need to do something. But I think whatever is decided, we really have to get the rationale down.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I just went to both of your points. I think that
a lot of people and anybody I've talked to is expecting consolidation of the elementary schools. So where that expectation is right now, that allows for the potential discussion about one of the elements. And the other point I wanted to make earlier was, in looking at this, there is this stark difference of the white cars versus yellow cars. And I think that really shows us that community discussion and education and constant, conversations and listening sessions are going to be highly valuable. And I think that in that scenario, if people get the same level of detail and transparency that we have, they very well may land in this.
So there was a question here.
Oh, well, it was just to add on that I went to kindergarten. I went to Island Park K through 6. My children went there. We're on the north end. I actually petitioned Kathy Morrison, who let me go. We love. I'm friends with my Island Park friends. We talk about it. All of us understand, and not one person has been like, oh, like everyone. When I've talked to them, and I go to lunch with 4 Island Park, alumni. We sit there and I explain it, and everyone gets it. So I don't know. I really just think that's it.
I would just say, I think not to be dismissed as the safety concern of the school itself. Like when I brought it up to people, say, yeah, it's not a safe.
And that's the other thing too, like, oh, maybe traffic will be better.
Yeah.
I think there's some benefit to the community overall too. And people are like, oh, this might not be so bad.
Acknowledge that taking your first grader out
Traffic. It causes a major bottleneck there in the morning. Yeah.
Just as an observation with Island Park being in the discussion, I put, just for transparency, I put my yellow card on C, but I honestly feel like it may be more with A because C doesn't address the elementary scenarios. And it may be a stronger point to include that elementary because it is right-sizing the school district, and that plan of moving to 3 and a more proficient model might actually help the case of the bond.
Yeah. So I want to ask a question. I don't know if there's really a good answer to it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts or comments about why the white cards are up here. And so I'm going to say 2 things. One is that there's a high likelihood that there's a lot of education district thinkers, supporters in this room, right? As opposed to naysayers who are like, I'm here to shut you guys down, right? So there's that. But the other part of it is, because somebody mentioned it, is you mentioned it actually. You've learned a lot, seen a lot, heard a lot over the last meetings. So do you think that if the broader community could get, of which not everyone is at the level of supporter that you probably are, just with regard to schools and all of that. Remember, there are people out there who don't fall into that as much. With the level of information and detail, do you think that would get a lot of your community here, or does it really still lead them here? Just because it's lower.
What do we need percentage-wise?
I think that it's 60 is really good. I think we're trying to do it. Well, legislative deal with the exception, but I think well, it's not right. No.
Here, getting people here to know, are they really going to be here after they learn that you said?
I mean, that wasn't the point I was going to make, but yes, I mean, I think it all comes down to education. I think that we're projecting kind of what's happened in the past with the ones that have failed, and then once the education happens, even if it's a little bit less, as long as what you're doing makes sense. But that wasn't the point I wanted to make. So go on and all.
Yeah, well, it comes back.
Yeah.
Raise your hand. Yeah.
So the things I'm worried about are the loud groups on the island, and that tends to be some of the older residents. Sorry. And then the folks that left for private school, oh Lordy, are they organized and are they left? And that's what concerns me. Like almost turn off. Look
at some of the
so mad about something that was public school. I mean,
look at some of the statistics from the board documents from the last several months. There's been some reports. The majority of kids that on the island that are at a huge majority of kids on the island that are at private schools are at faith-based schools.
Yeah.
We can't compete with that. If people want faith-based, they're going to go faith-based. The people that the other majority that left is because they moved out of the region. They're not living in Mercer Island. They're not going to Mercer Island schools. And then we've got lots of people moving into. So this enrollment decline, there was a big red herring. You know, yes, it was COVID. It happened faster than we expected, but we were expecting it. And it's based on birth rate, and it's the entire region. So people with remote work don't have to live near the city anymore. So people are making those choices, but really the majority of private school, it's faith-based, which that's a choice parents are going to make. What I was going to say is with regards to scenario A, and I think A because it hits all the kids. I also, if you look at the years for the elementary schools and then the middle school, it would hit at least some of those kids twice, the youngest elementary school students, and then would hit it again in middle school. That's disrupting them twice. I just don't know that that's worth it. Yeah. But if we look at statistics for our non-school advocates, which is, I think, why, these are people, we're all pro-school, doing the right thing by our kids. Many of us scrimp and save to live here so that our kids can go to the schools. And that's the school population overall. The rest need to be convinced based on our pocketbook. And if we look at property value increase since 2010 or 2015, I mean, what is it, like 500% in a lot of respects? So, and that we can sell this easily. And I know there's statistics to support it that our schools are one, if not the highest driving force of our increased property rates. So that's what's going to get, we're improving our schools and you're benefiting cost-wise. There's going to be I'll be offensive, that our next door crowd that's going to be no, but that's like 20%. Sorry.
Not much of it.
No, there's nothing.
So a couple things. One is I have run into a couple parents that left and are upset with the school district.
I didn't mean there's none.
And when they said, well, you got to get this happening before you're going to pass upon that. And my message to them is, it's a public school district. Everybody's got a very strong opinion. Please come to the meetings. Please speak up. Please email board members. Please consider running for the board. We can't hold hostage a public school system because you're not getting your way. Please make sure your voice is heard. Not everybody's going to get their way. So just make sure you're part of it. My observation is, 25% of the public is going to vote no on pretty much anything. And if there's a organized no group, that's not going to really be very helpful. So that's just something. I could say one other thing, but I forget. Yeah.
In terms of the order, IMS and then Lakeridge versus the other way around, one of the things Deborah just said that really resonated with me is you don't want to end up having your child disrupted twice. And so that's where, although I think the elementary does need to be addressed, and I think we need to address it in the bond itself. But in terms of the order, if you do IMS first, and then those kids that were in Lakeridge will move into a new school, and then you'll have a different class of students.
I mean, look at our last levy where we were passed to the highest rate ever, 73%?
72.
73, 74. And it's because, like what Ralph said, there was not a no campaign. So I think that just demonstrates the education and then also the discord going in as a united front. It's hard for people I mean, I didn't realize that the no from the 2012 was from that group. So that's huge.
Yeah, if there are people out of this committee that don't agree with the final decision and then actively go out and campaign against it, they've got a lot of credibility because they worked on it and they're telling their fellow citizens, you shouldn't vote for this.
So with so many white cards, well, collectively landing on the larger measures of this group, and by far this one, when you think about the compelling reasons, so I'm hearing a couple of things. I'm going to take a step back here. Two things that are coming out pretty strong is for any community member, and definitely ones who don't have kids in school, retired folks and everything like that, they have to be compelled that what is behind this, particularly if it's a bigger one, has to compel them to say, yeah, I see what you're saying. I get it. It makes sense to me. I support it. Right. So that, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. The second thing I'm hearing, and I want you to push back on me if you don't agree with this, is I haven't heard anyone here tell any stories about people that they have met or their friends, most of whom are probably school supporters too, that would be against consolidation. No one has said, I think this is going to kill us, or this is going to split the community. I haven't heard that.
Somebody tell me that they wouldn't support anything unless it was consolidation.
And it sounds like this is related to just fiscal responsibility and recognizing what the numbers are saying.
It's also impacting like Lake Ridge. They're in an uproar because 4 and 5 can combine classes and parents don't want that. So they're seeing right now what low enrollment is. Like my kid at Island Park, they're going to have 2 fifth grade classrooms instead of 3. There's 64 fifth graders or fourth graders this year. That's 32 kids in a classroom. I don't want that for my daughter. I understand exactly what it means to have low enrollment, and we're seeing it. Like parents are seeing it. So we're like, we want to do something to avoid these scenarios that we don't want.
So you're thinking, and I see your hand back there. I'm okay. So you're thinking, I'm going to press again a little bit harder, that the whole issue about consolidation, given what people already know out there, what they're seeing in their schools, what the numbers seem to indicate, that it's not going to be that big. It's not going to be a problem.
I think it needs.
Push it.
I think that's right, as long as you say in basically the same traffic, you're not going to sell the property.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
I'm fearful that it would be an issue, but I haven't seen any evidence that it's.
Okay.
Well, and I was the one that was expressing some concern as an alumni, Island Park, parent alumni.
Yeah.
But you're telling me the parents that are there now recognize it, and the value of it or the benefit. And I think that would be part of our education and messaging, is that this is the fiscally responsible thing to do. We can consolidate potentially smaller classrooms, and we're still going to maintain the property for future use.
And it sounds like it's also kind of educationally preferable because you don't have to consolidate grade levels, and
We're already seeing the impacts of enrollment.
The biggest impact would be if parents feel like the decision was made and then announced versus them being a part of the process.
Yeah.
So however it happens,
Yeah.
it just needs to get a community engagement to get, like, if we come to that conclusion, we can't just go out and say we came to that conclusion.
Right.
They need to feel a part of the decision.
And that is a great point, and I don't want to grab that for a second, because that's what we're going to do. That's the intention, and that's why I'm pushing on you right now, because come the fall, a lot of things, people feel good about it, the district and the board and all of that. When we go back out and talk with the broader community, this will likely be one of the things, because it's built into this discussion with all of these size of these blue boxes and everything, right? 600 students. And again, it's a learning opportunity. We're not saying this is the way it is. Sorry, folks, everybody. This is what a group of community members, after learning a lot and understanding, feel is the most appropriate fiscally. And in these ways, educationally, here are the reasons why. And now we want to hear what the broader community thinks about it. And if the broader community turns out and they say, uproar, no, oh no, don't do that. Now we know, right? There were other folks out there that we're not aware of who did have strong feelings about this, and then we have to rethink because, well, we need to. Yeah.
A question for Fred. Does the age of our building, especially the elementary schools, play a role at all in attracting the retaining staff as opposed to brand new schools all through Bellevue, all through this? Is 70-year-old buildings a factor or not an issue at all?
It's probably not a huge staff piece in terms of attract and retain. It's more about the district as a whole. It's a little tricky right now because of the contraction going on across our profession. So there's not a lot of movement happening. But over the years, the bigger questions are, if I come, how are you going to support me? What does your professional development look like? What does professional support look like? Sustainability, what's it look like over time? So we don't get a lot of shopping, at least on the facilities from the outside that I'm aware of.
That's not a good idea.
That's all.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I said,
Yeah, you were.
Well, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but I'm wondering, I don't know if it's been considered by the school district or naively if it's even a possibility, but similar to public universities or private schools, I guess considering our demographics and the level of philanthropy on Mercer Island, is it possible to have benefactors or people, someone might want to pay for the stadium and have it named after them? Or is that even a possibility? Or alternately, to do private fundraising, will the state permit our district to fund any portion of this privately as citizens, as PTAs, as a community?
I haven't seen a lot of that on the public side in my career in terms of some of those pieces. I don't know, Brandy, if you've seen much of that or Matt in yours. Typically, I don't see it tried a lot. And I think a lot of that's because of the public nature of it versus the private nature. So maybe it's just not part of the thinking behind that. But I don't know, Brandy, have you seen?
I've never been involved with the school district that raised private funds. I've seen bits and pieces donated. Like you said, like a stadium or, somebody put the cover, something, some small component, but usually in the it's
Like this question will often come up in the terms of like partnerships, basically, with some private entity or it could be another public entity too. But what we always kind of say is, yes, I mean, if you can forge partnerships with people at whatever level they can bring capital to the table, do so. But don't plan on that offsetting things like $118 million middle school, because those partnerships usually equate to, and this is not poo-pooing that kind of a partnership, by the way. I mean, this is important. They usually come to a few $1 million. It's not $118 million. Maybe you can do that. I don't know. So yeah, if you can forge partnerships, go for it, but don't count on them. I think this is the process you have to count on, which is driven by your community's willingness to support via their taxes, the public.
But on the CapTech side, Kate, to your point, that might be some of the direction schools are going to have to go in, or some of those smaller projects, a stadium or whatnot. There, absolutely. Our next electric bus, Osher purchased, so it's going to be named after Osher. So I'm not hearing
going on. I'm hearing a kind of concern about this question of consolidation. It's about making sure that the communication of why this is even being put forth is clear and out there, and then we'll see how everyone else in the community responds to it. and they can tell us otherwise. Now, going back to my first point of the difference between these boards, stating the obvious, these two are much less of a heavy lift to get there with folks. And you indicated that by the yellow cards, right? These are more likely to pass. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that statement, because they're lower, right? And they're still addressing clear need. But with your white cards over here, most of your white cards over here, particularly on this one, what you're saying is, and now I'm going to put words in your mouth for those people who put their cards up here, is, but I believe that this is what we should do, because you put your card up here, right? So now my question to you is this. You now, if you were asked to communicate the compelling reasons why this is what should be done, because there are obviously some compelling reasons for you why you put your cards up here. And you were going to go out and communicate that to the community. Oh, you run into somebody at Starbucks and you go, hey, here there's a potential bond discussion or whatever. And now you've got to explain to them why they should consider this compelling. What are the reasons why? I mean, you've said them up here, but I kind of want to hear you talk a little more about, elaborate on them. Like, is it because all levels are touched in this? Is that the main reason why? Is it because the remaining buildings here are not in great condition and the older elementaries are not in good condition either, and you need to get them both going? Go ahead.
I mean, I would say that, and also it's not just the old elementaries, it's solving a demographic issue that we're having coming up with low enrollment. So you will need that elementary school as part of the equation, because it will not just impact Lakeridge, it is going to impact the entire island, because every elementary school will be impacted by that.
Right.
So it kind of has to be part of the solution, or the elementary schools just don't get addressed at all.
Right.
Like we see.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I like that.
A couple things, putting all of the middle schoolers under the same roof, essentially, like uniting that campus. And then with the elementary schools, like thinking long term, this solves some of the traffic issues and safety issues with Island Park, because we're moving toward getting the kids out of that school. And to do that, we need to make a slightly larger school somewhere.
Right.
It's like, like dominoes. There are certain things we need to do to set us up for success.
Right.
And it's not safe.
So, and I'll come over here in a second. So I'm hearing that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to, is that an elementary really needs to be embedded in the plan, whichever one it is, to address the sort of reality of the numbers, which are dropping enrollment, okay, and this idea that, hey, fiscally and educationally, we need to be looking at consolidation. And the only way you can do that really is to, and consolidate, is to either, you have to add capacity at least one of your sites. I think so. Close a school.
Is that truly true?
Close a school, I think.
In 3 years' time, when this would even be going, is that true? Or do we have enough to do it without a new school? That's what I think we're going to be up against.
Yeah.
So this is the timing issue, because as of today, we're still in that too big for 4, not small enough for 3. But where will we
But
be
in 3 years,
when we get there? That's where I think on the first night we were all together, there is capacity in there with not bringing much in terms of modulars or whatnot, where a community could say, why don't you still close Island Park? Just put them into all the schools. The question is, can you do that without having any hope around what are we building and rebuilding? Randy, were you going to add on to that, or was that was the first?
My sales pitch on this is you to a community member. You bought into our vision back in 2014, 15 that there would be a second phase. So you agreed with that when you supported that bond and we did phase one. So we're now back, as we told you would be, to do phase two at the middle school. All of our kids will benefit. While it's possible that enrollment would allow us to just go to 3 schools, we're talking about a 70-year-old building. There's seismic issues. There's other health and safety issues. And our kids are in the 21st century, not in a 1950s educational model, which that building is.
Yeah.
So those would be my,
Yeah, those are good. Yes.
So-
Can I just add one more under hers? Because we're essentially asking the community to do that. Because we're going to have to move all the kids into 3 schools while we build that
But
other
I'm playing
one.
devil's advocate. My way doesn't cost $279 million. This is what we're going to be again, right? And I'm saying with a smile on my face.
Right.
You know, this is.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a very good point. Diane.
So
And I'll go back.
first of all, the first thing I want to say is I want to move my white card from B to A. I'm serious. And then the other one is the question of enrollment and timing. And if we are going to build on site, so that means moving all the Lake Ridge kids, do we have enough room to be able to accommodate that? We would need more.
Well, it depends on when it would happen. And, how big those kindergarten classes are that are coming in. So those will be 2 of the variables. And it won't be all the Lake Ridge kids just moving. I mean, we can't just put them. Right. So we have to reboundary as part of the process.
Right. And then after Lake Ridge would be built potentially at a bigger size, would that then relieve size pressure on the remaining of the
Yeah, I mean, all of them, yes, I mean, absolutely.
So
if you have a larger number there.
I mean, that can now be around 50. Yeah, I'm just watching all the hands.
Help me understand what back to IMS and finish what you started, because the plan was started before 2012, and based on the projections, now enrollment at the middle school, there's more than a 25% increase in middle school students, and so I thought that I heard that possibly wouldn't be the need for space in the 1, 2, 3 buildings.
Well, there's a bunch of general classrooms in the older buildings that you need even with the enrollment decrease. So you still have what's projected 960 or 950 or something, I want to say, when you get out to years. Yeah.
We're back to basically where we are now.
Yeah.
1,200.
Yeah. So the new building in and of itself, both because of its size and what's in there, includes that being the only buildings. Students have to be in the other older buildings. And those buildings were, from a condition standpoint, right at near the bottom of the barrel.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, the middle school would be more about modernity and consolidations, not having 3 entity buildings and just fixing and finishing this. Because you're right, we have plenty of classroom space even today.
Yeah.
For handling our student
population. Yeah, you have capacity. It's more a condition situation and safety between the individual buildings. Okay, so Ralph, and then I'm saying, go ahead.
Questions, one on IMS, and then a slight concern about consolidating. Are we calling consolidating forever? Are we giving up on the fact we're going to potentially ever go back to 4? And if we do that, are we going to be tempted to go beyond 600 for Lake Ridge? I mean, 600 up to 600, I'm sort of comfortable with right now. But beyond that, I start losing my own passion for it, because my own personal preference is smaller elementary school. So, but that's my own personal thing. Yeah. So it's a little bit gray right now in terms of are we committing to 3? And if we're going to be building, are we going to be building larger than 600? How do we handle this 3 versus 4 and future enrollment? Concerned about that. And then is it Integra designed the phase 2 IMS? As I recall, IMS, if they ever did this phase 2, it would be 2-story. It would actually free up some space. I think there was like a field that could get freed up. Is it possible to put the staging over on that area as opposed to putting it on the new track and stuff like that?
Well, remember that track is nearly 20 years old.
Okay.
I mean, it gets ready to be rebuilt. And by the time we would get to it, the turf will be ready.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So they are down, from what they were before the rebuild.
Did you have a question, Matt, before I?
Oh, no.
You're okay. Okay.
I'm going to piggyback on what Ralph said.
Okay, then I'll go back here.
That's why I like A over B, because if we do one elementary school at a time, you can then respond to changes a little more easily. So we can see how the enrollment's going, and that gives time to respond to that. Either it's like another 600 at West Mercer, or maybe that one has to be bigger, but it gives us a little bit of a buffer to see just how things are going.
And we still have that third process.
And you still have Island, like whatever goes, you still have, there's a lot of legal.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question of why you did or doing on scenario A, why the middle school first and Lakeridge second. I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, actually, when we put it up on the board and panels on that chart, we just sort of didn't make that judgment. We just said it didn't matter. But tonight, we had heard, I think, a very compelling reason, and people can push back on the two, of why you would do the middle school first. And that is, what you don't have happen is put an elementary in construction, and so then you disrupt the elementary kids for that year. And then, so they and some of those elementary kids matriculate to middle school, and if it's second, then it's in disruption potentially during part of that. So it's trying to limit the amount of disruption that any one student would have to deal with over the course of their schooling here.
Okay.
Just to speak on that briefly, when I was bringing this up, and somebody who went through Mercer Island schools in the 90s and was impacted at elementary school and at middle school and at high school with that path remodels, and their first point was, don't do that. That was a real pain in the butt. So
Right. Yeah.
he remembers it 30 years later.
And you didn't say, look, you turned out fine.
Most
No, come on, please.
I think from a student perspective, I think D and E are just a non-starter. Like, you want students to go back to the parents and be like, oh, I really think this is a great idea. But I think if you don't finish IMS, like, students are just not going to be excited about it. I think like when students get their schedule and they see that all their classes are in the old building, they're upset. And when you see such a nice building every single day and then you walk over to the other building, it's like such a big letdown. So I just think in terms of like, the community is already invested in it. They already have one foot in the door. I think it's a really non-starter to do
How many of your classes were in the new building, or some of your classes were in the older buildings?
I remember one year specifically, I had to change floors and buildings every single class. And it was like 3 and 3. And then one year I had like 5 and 1. And it's just like, it's just such a big hassle when like the new facilities are just so much, like everything works better. The chairs are better, the desks are better, everything's better. And then you switch buildings and it's just like, so I think it's really hard for students to do that side by side. I'd rather have it all be happy, all be really good. And so you might as well take one for the student.
Yeah, no, that's great input right there. Yeah.
When I filled out my card, I thought it was important that Lakeridge go first, because I think we as a district have a long history of underbuilding from a capacity perspective. Right, Lakeridge is a good example. They did the remodel and they made it with 4 portables next door because they missed on their demographics. And so, to me, talking about wiggle room and having some space, to me, doing Lakeridge first at 600, leaving Islander for 4 or 5 years, or whatever it is, and seeing what's really going to happen, 3 or 4 years after that felt important to me. Yeah, because I worry that we'd underbuild. I think, though, that the argument about the kid going through, 8 years of school, 9 years of school, in a disruptive building, not that that's quite what would happen. Yeah, that's the problem.
And just Ralph, to your point, just going back to all of our demographic studies, I just wanted to be sure nothing really has us, even in the best of times, getting to 1,800 in the next decade, which would be the 600 in each school. We're going to probably, hover around that 1,450 to 1,550 at best, somewhere in there. So I don't think we're going to hit that 1,800, at least in this time frame that we're talking.
What's the capacity of Northwood?
Northwood is
500
with the portable part. What was it? 450. 500 with the portables.
I think that the other short answer is, with regard to would you ever go back and use that site, or are you going to press on with consolidation forever? I think the answer is, well, as you move into the future, you're going to do what makes the most sense. And so if you're not selling the property, right? So it's always available, and you're going to manage it in the way that makes the most sense. And 20 years from now or 30 years from now, I mean, the district is the long term that you should 50 years from now.
To leave tonight without any further meetings, the one thing that would be circling around in my head throughout the summer is, did we have enough of the conversation of people would support consolidation as long as, or people would support it if, because what we haven't run through are all the different timeline scenarios and the movement of students. And so there are some questions that I would have lingering still that would be unanswered going into next year. And the only thing I fear is losing the summer, because the schools are shrinking quickly. It's not like this is out on the horizon. And so consolidation needs to be discussed sooner than later.
Right.
So selfishly, I might have some questions around that, whether or not. So that was one thing that I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
Can you give us a homework assignment of going and talking amongst our friends and trying to hear what people say for and against it, so we can bring some data back, some unofficial data back?
The only risk we run is getting out ahead of our community.
They're already thinking about it.
They're thinking about it, but as soon as we take formal action coming out of it,
This stuff is recorded and it's online. People are watching it.
I don't know.
They are. Anytime.
Yeah.
So it's out there.
Well, and remember, I want to say, for the recording here, that the intention here is to make this process as transparent as possible. We are not in any way trying to ram a concept down anybody's throat here. This needs to be driven by what makes sense in the view of the community, right? And if it doesn't make sense, then they're not going to support it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're dead in the water.
Secret. This isn't a secret.
No.
This isn't a secret.
Right.
So,
And that's why I think it's a fair thing to say, and we can roll in. And that if there are other pieces of this conversation that would be useful, I think maybe we make the big ask and we ask whoever can come to a follow-up meeting to do so. And we structure what we want to ask them around that.
don't put it on next door, folks.
Or I think the date we had was 26.
The 26th of June,
3 weeks from tonight.
3 weeks from tonight. Yeah, and I don't know that we would ask you to just commit like right now, but and we know it's a big ask to have you come out during the summer. But how many of you? Let's just do a whole hand raise on the 26th of June. How many of you, pending double checking your calendars, would be willing to come to that meeting? Well, I think willing. Yeah. Well, if you're not able, then willing. Raise your hand. Yeah. I'm assuming if you're willing, you have to be able to come to. Yeah. Okay, so you've probably got 2/3 of the group committed, which I think is a good fair amount. So yeah, let's send an email out and get a formal response to just see who is able to come. And then we'll dive in and get sort of another layer of information.
And so I think, continuing conversations with neighbors, continuing these pieces, there's certainly not something, I just hate to put homework, but go get 10 people. But yes, keep talking about it. I'm talking about it.
Yeah, informal conversations are fine. I mean, we don't want to hold stuff back from what you do in your lives.
This is a decision for the community to make. And it can't be presented like, well, this is what we decided.
Right.
Here you go.
Yeah. No, that's not it.
Yeah.
And so before we're bumping up against our 8 o'clock, so I do want to cover, I've got a slide back there. You don't need to look, I'll just really what our next steps are. We've kind of built this next meeting in June into this. But in August, at some point, we're planning on doing a board update. This is just sort of letting everybody know on the board. This is what we've been doing the last few months. I'm sure they're aware of a lot of it in any case. And this is kind of where we're at. This is the state of the union, so to speak, with this. And then pending discussions by the board on, hey, this sounds like really good work that's being done. And yes, it would be really good to bounce this off the community in the fall and just see what the broader community feels about what's been discussed in the proposals and thoughts on the table. We will in early September reconvene you to preview the material that we would be sharing out to the broader community. And one of the main reasons, again, we want to do that is when we summarize this, because it's going to have to be way summarized down because we don't have all these meetings like we have with you. We want to make sure that the way in which we're representing it, and particularly the discussions and thoughts that you have, are correct and not misrepresenting what you have said and been thinking. And this is the opportunity for you to look at it and say, yeah, I think you guys pretty much captured it. So I feel good about you going out and talking to my neighbors. Okay. Then in late September, October, we'll have the community outreach meetings. If you guys can come to those and provide sort of input at certain points along the way, if people are asking questions, that would be fabulous because, again, you guys know more than anybody else here in the community regarding facilities. And then in November, we're planning on pulling all of this together and writing the report that captures what you have done, where you kind of landed, what the broader community feedback is. And if at that point there's some clarity around a preferred approach, this is what everyone in the community seems to be coalescing around, or not everyone, what most people in the community are coalescing around. We won't get full agreement for sure. Then we'll capture that in the report. And then at that point, the board can take that and consider it, and consider next steps. And then we'll see what happens from there. Last words, Fred, anything before we?
No, I mean, when we are meeting every Monday in between these meetings and wondering, all of these conversations are so important and help us, because ultimately we all want what's best for the school district. And if we don't do the we with the community, then our students get nothing. Right. And so it's important for us to do what, even if it's smaller, bigger, wherever, that it's going to benefit our students today and then tomorrow, and then we'll keep moving forward. So your candor and this conversations are invaluable.
Yeah. 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 And that is so key, because I'm looking at these and I just see this just difference between these two, all the yellow, all the white. We really feel like this is what we should do. And if you can't get your community support, which is moving these yellow cards, more of the yellow cards over to this because they now understand it. If you can't do that, then you don't have anything. And so that's, I think, part of the next conversation on the 26th too.
And, if 73% supported our levies, then we only have 13% that we can afford to lose before the bond doesn't pass, because if they ever remind us it's a 60%, not a 50%. So it's, we have to really think about that component. And if 25 are going to say no right away, then we've got to hang on to that other 15%.
Yeah, historically, I think if we come to a plan, really including broad community input, which is going to come in the fall. Okay. And if we make adjustments according to what the community is saying to us, then they should support the plan, because it's coming from the community, right? It's embedded in the community. That's where we want to be. And that's the importance of the transparency of the process and the communication that everyone's been talking about, because it makes a real plan that will get support. That's where we want to go. All right. Thanks for coming tonight. Well done. We got that.